Ladies and gentlemen, when life gets tough, it feels like the world is pressing against us with all its weight. Challenges stack up, setbacks arrive uninvited, and sometimes it feels easier to give up than to keep going. But what separates those who rise from those who stay down is not luck or even talent. It's mindset, it's the ability to remain positive, not in a naive way, but in a powerful, intentional way. Today, I want to share 7 ways to cultivate that positivity when life feels heaviest. When life gets tough, most of us instinctively fall into the habit of telling ourselves stories that reinforce our fears and frustrations. We say things like, "This always happens to me," or "Why can't I ever get it right?" Those words might seem harmless, but the reality is that the story we attach to our experiences becomes the lens through which we see the world. It doesn't matter what happens to us. What matters is how we interpret it. That is the difference between people who rise above challenges and those who remain stuck in them. Think about this. 2 people can go through the exact same event, losing a job, failing an exam, or experiencing heartbreak, and yet walk away with completely different lessons. One might declare it the end of their world, while the other might see it as a chance to reinvent themselves. What separates them isn't luck or even resilience, it's the story they chose to tell themselves about that moment. Neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that when we reframe how we see an experience, we literally rewire the pathways in our brains. Stress that once triggered panic can, with reframing, spark curiosity or determination. Instead of saying, "This is the worst thing that's ever happened," we can choose to say, "This is difficult, but it's teaching me something I couldn't have learned otherwise." The brain responds differently, the body responds differently, and suddenly the obstacle that once felt impossible becomes manageable. Thomas Edison famously reframed his thousands of unsuccessful attempts at creating the light bulb. He didn't call them failures, he called them 10,000 ways that won't work. Imagine the psychological strength that kind of perspective requires. Most of us would have given up after a handful of failed tries. Yet Edison chose to see progress in every misstep. He shifted the meaning of failure from finality to feedback, and it is this reframing that fueled his persistence until he eventually succeeded. What if you applied that same lens to your own life? Instead of labeling a breakup as rejection, what if you reframed it as redirection towards someone who's better aligned with your values? Instead of calling a financial setback a disaster, what if you saw it as the tuition you paid for a priceless lesson in money management? When you reframe, you take back the power from your circumstances and place it firmly in your hands. Here's the truth: adversity isn't optional, but interpretation is. Every time you face a setback, you stand at a crossroads. One path leads you to bitterness, self-pity, and stagnation. The other leads you to growth, wisdom, and resilience. The choice depends on the story you decide to tell yourself. Real-life examples of this are everywhere. Think about athletes who suffer devastating injuries. Some of them walk away from the sport forever, consumed by what they've lost. Others use that injury as fuel to build strength in new areas of life, coaching, advocacy, or even mastering their craft in a different way. The injury didn't dictate the outcome, the interpretation did. Or consider entrepreneurs who lose everything. History is filled with names of people who went bankrupt before becoming household legends. Walt Disney was once fired from a newspaper job because they said he lacked imagination. Imagine if he had accepted that story as truth. Instead, he reframed it, choosing to see it as a step towards something bigger. Today, Disney is synonymous with imagination. This isn't about ignoring pain or pretending things don't hurt. They do. Reframing doesn't mean denying reality. It means deciding what reality will mean for you. You still acknowledge the difficulty, but you add to it a layer of possibility. You say, yes, this is hard. And yes, I will use it. Think of a time in your own life when something went wrong, a time when you thought, I'll never get past this. Now, fast forward to today. Haven't you already proven yourself wrong? Haven't you already overcome challenges you once believed were insurmountable? That's the power of reframing. What once looked like an ending became a beginning. What once felt like punishment became preparation. The story you tell yourself is not just words, it's the foundation of your entire outlook on life. If your inner dialogue is filled with defeat, your actions will follow. If your inner dialogue is filled with possibility, your actions will align with that too. The voice inside your head is either your jailer or your liberator, and you are the author of its script. So the next time life throws you something you didn't plan for, pause before you label it. Instead of rushing to call it a failure, a disaster, or a mistake, ask yourself, what else could this mean? What could this teach me? How could this redirect me? That small shift in language could be the difference between giving up and growing stronger. Remember, Edison didn't invent the light bulb in one magical spark of brilliance. He reframed failure thousands of times until persistence turned possibility into reality. You have that same ability. The story you tell yourself is the foundation of your positivity, your perseverance, and ultimately your success. And perhaps the most inspiring truth is this: you don't have to wait for life to change before you change your story. You can choose today to start telling yourself a better, stronger, more empowering narrative. You can choose to see progress where others see problems and lessons where others see loss. Because in the end, it's not life itself that defines you. It's the story you decide to tell about it. Imagine for a moment how much of our lives we spend worrying about things we can never touch, never alter, never influence. We replay conversations in our heads trying to rewrite them after the fact. We worry about whether someone else will approve of us, whether the future will unfold the way we hope, or whether mistakes we made in the past will forever define us. The irony is that while our minds are tangled up in things we cannot control, the real levers of power, the ones right in front of us, remain untouched. We give away our energy to shadows while the light of possibility sits quietly, waiting for us to notice. Focusing on what you can control is not about shrinking your vision or lowering your ambitions. It's about reclaiming your power. Because when you shift your attention from the uncontrollable to the actionable, something changes inside you. You move from being a victim of circumstance to being an author of your story. Even in the darkest valleys of life, that shift can transform despair into direction. I once met a woman who was battling cancer. She told me that in the beginning, every thought was consumed by one question: why me? Why did she have to suffer when others seemed to live untouched? Why did her body betray her when she had done everything right? That question haunted her until it hollowed her out. And then one day she caught herself. She realized that why was a bottomless pit, an unanswerable question that left her powerless. So she replaced it with a new one. What can I do today to help my body heal? That single change in language shifted everything. Suddenly she had agency. She could eat nourishing food. She could walk when she had the strength. She could meditate, breathe, laugh, pray. She couldn't control the cancer, but she could control how she lived through it. And in doing so, she found a strength that inspired everyone around her. We all face moments where life feels impossibly heavy. Maybe it's a job loss, a broken relationship, or a dream that collapses just when you thought it was within reach. In those moments, the temptation is to spiral into frustration and despair. We tell ourselves stories: if only they had supported me, if only they had started earlier, if only the economy were better. But those stories leave us powerless. The world becomes something happening to us rather than something we are actively shaping. The truth is, our circle of control is smaller than we wish, but it is infinitely more powerful than we realize. You can't control what others think of you, but you can control how much you let their opinions steer your path. You can't control whether the sun rises tomorrow, but you can control whether you greet it with bitterness or gratitude. You can't control every outcome, but you can always control the effort, the attitude, and the choices you bring to each moment. And that is where life changes, not in the vast unknown, but in the simple decision to take ownership of what's in front of you. Think about how we drive a car. We don't fixate on every reckless driver we see on the road because we know we can't control them. What we do is adjust our speed, keep our hands steady on the wheel, and stay alert. That's how we arrive safely, not by controlling the chaos, but by mastering our own response to it. Life works in the same way. It's easy to dismiss this as small thinking, but the greatest leaders, innovators, and survivors in history didn't waste their lives on what they couldn't control. They focused relentlessly on what they could. Nelson Mandela couldn't control the fact that he was in prison for 27 years, but he could control his mindset in that prison. And when he finally walked free, he carried a spirit of forgiveness instead of vengeance. That choice didn't just shape his life, it shaped an entire nation. When you practice focusing on what you can control, you begin to notice something remarkable. The size of your influence expands. People are drawn to those who radiate steadiness and uncertainty. They want to follow someone who takes ownership instead of blame, who finds solutions instead of excuses. And in time, your circle of control grows because your actions ripple outward, inspiring others to do the same. But let's be honest, this is not easy. Our minds are wired to obsess over threats, to imagine worst-case scenarios, to seek answers in places we will never find them. It takes courage to resist that pull and instead ground yourself in the present moment. It takes discipline to say, I can't change yesterday, but I can change what I do today. It takes faith to believe that those small daily choices matter even when you don't yet see the results. There's a story I love about a man who, after losing his job, started planting a single tree each day in his village. People mocked him. What difference could one tree make in the face of unemployment, poverty, and despair? But years later, the barren landscape had become a forest, bringing shade, fruit, and life to the community. He couldn't control the economy. He couldn't control whether companies were hiring, but he could control his two hands, his time, and his decision to contribute. And in the end, that small act changed everything. When you shift your focus to what you can control, life feels lighter. You stop carrying burdens that were never yours to carry in the first place. You stop fighting battles you can never win. Instead, you become deeply invested in the things that are within your reach. Your words, your habits, your integrity, your choices. And those things, when compounded over time, can reshape not only your own life, but the lives of those around you. So the question is not, why is life so unfair? The better question is, what can I do right now with what I have? Because in answering that, you discover a kind of freedom that no circumstance can take from you. It's the freedom to act, to respond, to create, to move forward. That is where real power lies, not in controlling the world, but in mastering yourself. Imagine for a moment that life is like a long journey across a vast ocean. Some days the waters are calm and the sun reflects on the surface, and you can see the horizon with absolute clarity. Other days, storms rage, waves crash against your boat, and you wonder whether you'll even make it to the next morning. In those moments, the people you bring on board with you matter more than anything else. They can either weigh your vessel down like anchors, making every storm more unbearable, or they can be like wings lifting you over the waves, reminding you that even the darkest nights give way to dawn. We often underestimate the power of the people around us. We think our attitudes, our perspectives, and even our sense of hope are entirely self-made. But science tells a different story. Harvard research revealed something profound: happiness is not just personal, it's social. If someone close to you becomes happier, your own likelihood of becoming happier increases by 25%. Imagine that for a second. Simply being near someone who chooses optimism, gratitude, and resilience can lift you by a quarter of your own potential. That's not coincidence. That's the invisible transfer of energy, of spirit, of belief. It means that who you allow into your circle will shape the very way you see your world. Think about a time when you were struggling, truly struggling. Maybe it was a heartbreak, a job loss, a diagnosis, or a period when the weight of life felt unbearable. Now think about the people who stood beside you in that moment. Did they feed your doubt, your fear, your hopelessness? Or did they offer light when you couldn't find it yourself? Did they remind you that you were capable of more, that tomorrow could be better, that you weren't alone? The truth is, in those defining seasons, we borrow courage from others. We borrow belief until we can build it again within ourselves. That's why surrounding yourself with uplifting people is not optional, it's essential. Negativity is powerful. It spreads quickly like smoke filling a room, and before you know it, you're breathing it in without realizing. It colors the way you see your problems, it narrows your vision, and it convinces you that no solution exists. Spend enough time with those who see life only through the lens of limitation, and soon you'll start to believe those limitations are your own. But positivity is equally powerful, in many ways even more so. It doesn't just brighten your outlook, it expands it. Positive people don't ignore reality. They reframe it. They see setbacks as lessons, obstacles as detours, and failures as stepping stones. And when you're near them, you can't help but begin to see possibility where you once saw only dead ends. We all know someone who carries that light within them. They walk into a room and suddenly the atmosphere changes. People feel safer, stronger, more hopeful. That person may not have all the answers, but their presence says, "You're not alone. We'll figure this out together." That kind of influence is priceless. And here's the best part: it's not reserved for a chosen few. Each of us has the capacity to be that person for someone else. When you choose to be uplifting, when you choose to believe in possibilities, you become a catalyst for change in the lives of others. But it begins with a decision about who you allow closest to you. Every day, consciously or not, you decide whose voices you give weight to. Are they voices of fear or voices of faith? Are they the ones who tell you it can't be done? Or the ones who whisper that maybe, just maybe it can? This is not about cutting people out of your life in coldness. It's about being intentional with the influences that shape your spirit. Just like you would protect your home from toxins, you must protect your heart and mind from negativity. There's a famous saying that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. If that's true, then ask yourself, who are my 5? Are they anchors keeping me tied to the same patterns of doubt and fear? Or are they wings helping me rise higher than I could alone? If you want to soar, you cannot afford to tie yourself down to those who refuse to leave the ground. And it's not just about survival, it's about thriving. Uplifting people do more than help you through hard times. They elevate you in good times too. They don't just clap for your victories. They push you to chase bigger ones. They don't just stand with you in storms. They walk with you into opportunities. They see more in you than you see in yourself, and they refuse to let you settle for mediocrity when greatness is within reach. There is a story of a young entrepreneur who failed in his first business. He poured his savings into it, sacrificed his time, and believed in the idea with everything he had. When it collapsed, he felt crushed, convinced he was not cut out for success. He considered giving up entirely. But his closest friend, someone who had believed in him all along, refused to let him quit. This friend reminded him of his vision, pointed out his resilience, and insisted that failure was proof of effort, not of inadequacy. That encouragement was enough to push him to try again. Years later, that same entrepreneur built a company worth millions, but he often said he owed it all to the one person who refused to let him believe the lie of his own failure. That is the power of surrounding yourself with the right people. One voice of belief can outweigh 1,000 voices of doubt. So what does this mean for you? It means that if life feels unbearable, the first place to look isn't just within, it's around. Who are you letting speak into your life? Who gets a seat at your table, a say in your dreams, a share of your energy? If you find yourself constantly weighed down, drained, discouraged, maybe it's not just the storms you're facing. It could be the crew you've chosen for your journey. You need people who remind you that storms pass, that tides shift, that you are stronger than you think. You need people who won't just hand you a life raft, but will help you rebuild your sails. At the end of the day, the choice is yours. You can stay among anchors, or you can rise with wings. You can cling to circles that keep you small, or you can surround yourself with people who help you grow. And when you make that choice, when you decide to fill your life with uplifting people, you don't just change your own story. You become part of a ripple effect, passing hope, belief, and possibility into the lives of everyone you touch. That is how positivity spreads. That is how change happens.
Yeah.
And that is how, even in the hardest of times, you find the strength to keep moving forward. Gratitude is often misunderstood as something that comes easily when life is good. When our plans fall into place, when the sun is shining, when the people around us are kind and supportive, gratitude feels like second nature. But those moments are not the true measure of thankfulness. The true test of gratitude arrives when the ground beneath us begins to shake, when we're faced with loss, uncertainty, or disappointment. That is when gratitude stops being a feeling and becomes a choice. Think about the last time life felt like it was falling apart. Perhaps it was the loss of a job, the betrayal of a friend, or the diagnosis that changed everything. In those moments, gratitude feels counterintuitive. The instinct is to ask, why me? Why now? And yet, what if the very thing we resist is the very thing that could give us strength to endure? Gratitude doesn't erase pain. It doesn't make heartbreak less real, but it does something remarkable. It balances it. It provides perspective. Research has shown this over and over again. A study out of UC Davis discovered that people who wrote down just 3 things they were grateful for every day experienced 25% less stress and slept better at night. Now think about that for a moment. Nothing in their external circumstances changed. The stressors didn't vanish. The problems didn't magically go away. What changed was the way they carried those burdens. Gratitude shifted the weight. It didn't lighten the load, but it gave them the strength to keep walking with it. This is the hidden power of gratitude. It's not about denying reality or pretending that hardship doesn't exist. It's about creating space for hope even when we're surrounded by chaos. Gratitude doesn't require perfection in our circumstances. It thrives in imperfection. It's like searching for stars in the middle of the night. The darkness doesn't disappear, but the light becomes visible if we choose to look up. I once met a man who had lost nearly everything. His business collapsed, his home was gone, and he was fighting to rebuild his life from the ground up. When I asked him how he managed to keep going, he said something I'll never forget. Every morning before I get out of bed, I thank life for the fact that I woke up. That means I get another chance. Everything else is extra. He wasn't an RV. He knew the challenges ahead of him were enormous. But by starting each day with gratitude, he gave himself the courage to face those challenges without being consumed by them. Gratitude doesn't mean ignoring the storm. It means standing in the middle of it and still finding reasons to hold on. It means recognizing that while we may not control the wind or the rain, we can choose the posture we take as it beats down on us. And that choice changes everything. When life feels overwhelming, gratitude becomes a kind of anchor. It steadies us. It keeps us from drifting too far into despair. It reminds us that no matter how much is lost, there is still something left. Maybe it's the unwavering support of a friend who checks in when no one else does. Maybe it's the ability to take a deep breath, which means we're still here. Or maybe it's simply the knowledge that storms eventually pass. Gratitude reminds us to notice these things and hold on to them like lifelines. There's also something profoundly contagious about gratitude. When we practice it, especially in times of hardship, it ripples outward. Others notice, it inspires. Imagine being in a workplace where tension is high, deadlines are looming, and everyone is on edge. One person who consistently acknowledges the small wins, who takes time to thank a colleague, who notices what's going right instead of only what's wrong, can change the entire atmosphere. Gratitude spreads. It shifts cultures, whether in families, friendships, or organizations. But here's the difficult part: practicing gratitude requires intention. It's not automatic. When life gets hard, the easier path is to focus on what's broken, what's missing, what's unfair. Gratitude asks us to pause, to step back, and to notice what's still working, what's still present, what's still beautiful. It takes discipline, it takes humility, and it takes courage, because it's much easier to complain than it is to be thankful. Consider the story of Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl. In the face of unimaginable suffering, he wrote about finding meaning in the smallest acts of kindness. A smile from a fellow prisoner, a fleeting moment of sunlight breaking through the clouds. He understood something profound. Gratitude was not about his circumstances, but about his perspective. And in that perspective, he found strength where most would only see despair. We may never face trials as extreme, but the principle is the same. Gratitude gives us a lens through which we see possibilities instead of dead ends. It changes the narrative we tell ourselves. Instead of saying, everything is falling apart, gratitude whispers, not everything is lost. Instead of, I have nothing left, gratitude reminds us, I still have something. That subtle shift can mean the difference between giving up and moving forward. So when life feels overwhelming, what if we started small? What if at the end of each day, we took a moment to write down 3 things we were grateful for? Not big, sweeping victories, just simple things. The smile of a child, the warmth of a meal, the fact that we made it through another day. Over time, those moments accumulate. They form a reservoir of resilience we can draw from when the next storm arrives, and storms will come. That's the nature of life. We cannot avoid them, but we can decide how we face them. Gratitude equips us to face them with strength, with hope, and with perspective. It doesn't eliminate the darkness, but it ensures that we can still see the stars. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, I invite you to pause. Take a breath. Look around. Find even one thing you can be thankful for. It might feel small, almost insignificant, but those small acknowledgments build upon each other, creating a foundation strong enough to withstand the hardest seasons. Gratitude doesn't change the storm, but it changes us. And when we change, everything else begins to shift. When we're stuck in hardship, it's easy to believe that what we're going through right now is everything. It feels as if this pain, this uncertainty, this disappointment will never end. Our minds trap us in the illusion that the present moment is the entire story, that the struggle we face today is somehow the sum of our lives. But life is not measured by a single page or even a single chapter. Life is a book. And just like any great story, it has moments of despair, moments of triumph, moments of conflict, and moments of joy. The hardest chapters are rarely the final ones. They are part of a much larger picture, a story still unfolding, and often the chapters that feel unbearable are the ones that prepare us for the greatest victories ahead. Think of Nelson Mandela, 27 years in a prison cell. 27 years of his life stripped away from family, from freedom, from the chance to walk in the sun as a free man. He could have let those years define him, reduced himself to the identity of a prisoner, a victim of injustice, a man whose life was stolen. But he didn't. He chose to see something greater than the bars around him. He carried within him a vision of a free South Africa, a vision of reconciliation, not revenge, of unity, not division. He understood that his life was more than the pain of the present. He refused to let one chapter define the book. And when that chapter closed, he stepped into another, one where he became not only a free man, but also a symbol of hope, a leader who transformed his nation and inspired the world. The question is, how often do we let our current circumstances trick us into believing they are permanent? A broken relationship feels like the end of love itself. A failed business feels like the end of opportunity. A rejection feels like the end of possibility. We convince ourselves that this is it, that the chapter we are in is the whole story. But that's never true. History is full of stories of people who looked beyond the hardship of today and found meaning in the bigger picture. Thomas Edison failed thousands of times before inventing the light bulb. If he believed failure was the whole story, the chapter of disappointment would have closed his book. Instead, he saw failure as a single scene in a much bigger narrative of discovery. This isn't just about famous people, though. This is about us. Every single one of us has faced moments when life feels unbearable. Maybe you've lost someone you love. Maybe you face financial ruin. Maybe you've been betrayed by someone you trusted. In those moments, it feels like the pain will never end, like this is who we are now, broken, defeated, defined by struggle. But when we look back years later, something incredible happens. We see that those very moments, the ones that nearly broke us, were the ones that shaped us. They gave us perspective, resilience, empathy, and strength we didn't know we had. It's like climbing a mountain. When you're stuck in the middle of the climb, exhausted and gasping for breath, staring at jagged rocks and steep cliffs, it feels endless. The pain dominates your focus. But when you reach the summit and turn around, you don't see the rocks, the blisters, or the cuts. You see the path that brought you here. You see the beauty of the journey. And suddenly, the hardship doesn't feel meaningless. It becomes essential. It becomes the very thing that made the summit possible. When life feels unbearable, we must remind ourselves this is a chapter, not the book. And more than that, we are the authors. We cannot always control the events that happen to us, but we can decide how we write them into our story. Do we label this chapter failure, or do we label it learning? Do we label it loss, or do we label it growth? Our interpretation gives meaning to the events we experience, and that meaning shapes what comes next. Think of a time when you felt hopeless. Go back to that moment in your memory. At the time, it may have felt like the end. But looking back, do you see how it was not the end at all? Maybe it pushed you to change direction. Maybe it forced you to grow. Maybe it led you to someone or something better. Life has a way of revealing over time that the darkest nights often prepare us for the brightest dawns. There's a story of a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbor said, "What terrible luck." The farmer replied, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned with 2 more wild horses. The neighbor said, "What wonderful luck." The farmer replied, "Maybe." The day after that, the farmer's son tried to ride one of the wild horses, fell, and broke his leg. The neighbor said, "What terrible luck." The farmer replied, "Maybe." Soon after, the army came through the village, drafting young men to fight in a war. They saw the farmer's son with a broken leg and left him behind. The neighbor said, "What wonderful luck." The farmer replied, "Maybe." The lesson is simple. No single event defines the whole story. What looks like tragedy today may reveal itself as blessing tomorrow. What feels unbearable now may become the very thing that saves us in the future. So when you feel trapped in a painful chapter, remember that the bigger picture is still being written. Hold on to the vision of where you are going, not just where you are. Anchor yourself to purpose, to meaning, to the belief that there is more ahead than what you see right now. Life is not asking you to erase the pain, but to trust that the pain belongs to a chapter, not the whole book. And maybe, just maybe, when this chapter closes, you'll look back and see that it was the turning point. That the hardship you endured was not a punishment, but a preparation. That the darkness you walked through was the path that led you to the light. That the story of your life is far richer, far more beautiful, far more meaningful than this moment could ever reveal. Because in the end, what defines us is not the pain of a single chapter, but the courage to keep turning the page. When we think about staying positive in tough times, most of us immediately go to mindset. We tell ourselves to think differently, to see the brighter side, to reframe our challenges. And yes, mindset matters. But what we often forget is that our mind doesn't operate in isolation. It lives inside a body. And when that body is tired, undernourished, or neglected, no amount of positive thinking can carry us very far. The connection between the body and the mind is not just poetic, it's biological. When we care for our body, we create the very foundation that allows our mind to thrive. Think about the last time you went without enough sleep. You probably noticed how quickly your patience wore thin. A small inconvenience felt like a mountain. A simple decision seemed overwhelming. Your body was trying to survive, and survival mode leaves very little energy for optimism. Now, compare that with a day when you felt well rested. Suddenly, the same problems didn't feel so heavy. You had perspective. You had creativity. You had hope. This isn't coincidence, it's physiology. Sleep regulates our hormones, restores our brain, and gives us the clarity to see beyond the immediate moment. Without it, our mind loses its anchor. The same is true for what we feed ourselves. Food is not just fuel for the body, it's information for the brain. A diet high in processed sugar and low in nutrients doesn't just affect our waistline. It affects our mood. Studies consistently show that people who eat more whole foods, fruits, and vegetables report lower levels of anxiety and depression. It's not about following a perfect diet, it's about recognizing that what we put on our plate can either weaken us or strengthen us in the moments we most need resilience. Movement 2 is more than exercise for the body, it's medicine for the mind. A Harvard study revealed that just 30 minutes of walking a day can reduce symptoms of depression by nearly 50%. That's not about becoming an athlete or transforming your appearance. That's about giving your brain the chemistry it needs to feel balanced and capable. Movement releases endorphins, regulates stress hormones, and creates a sense of accomplishment even in small doses. Sometimes the best way to clear your mind isn't to sit and think harder. It's to get up and move. We live in a culture that often treats self-care as indulgence. Rest is seen as laziness. Exercise is seen as optional. Healthy food is seen as a luxury. But when we reframe these things as essential tools for resilience, the story changes. Taking care of your body is not selfish. It's service. Because when you're healthier, you're stronger for your family, your colleagues, and your community. When your body is cared for, your mind has the stability to show up with kindness, patience, and creativity. Consider the story of a young professional who found herself drowning in stress at work. She thought the answer was working longer hours, pushing harder, and sacrificing sleep to keep up with the demands. But the more she pushed, the more irritable and negative she became. Her productivity declined, her relationships strained, and her confidence shrank. Finally, she made a simple shift. She committed to going for a walk every morning, eating a balanced breakfast, and setting a firm bedtime. Within weeks, her outlook began to change. The problems didn't disappear, but her capacity to handle them grew. She realized that her body was not a distraction from her goals, it was the vehicle to achieve them. This principle doesn't just apply to individuals, it scales to teams and organizations. A workplace that values rest encourages movement and promotes well-being as a workplace that breeds resilience and positivity. When people feel physically cared for, they bring more energy and optimism to the collective mission. On the other hand, burnout is contagious. When one person is depleted, negativity ripples outward. But when one person prioritizes health, that too can be contagious. It gives others permission to do the same. There's a reason airlines remind us to put on our own oxygen mask before helping others. If our body is gasping for air, our mind cannot focus on compassion or courage. And yet, in everyday life, so many of us are trying to serve others while running on empty. We believe that sacrificing our health is noble, but what if true nobility lies in sustainability? What if the greatest gift we can give others is our vitality, our presence, our ability to endure? The truth is, positivity is not an accident, it's an outcome. It's the natural result of a mind that feels supported by a healthy body. And the good news is it doesn't take drastic changes to build that support. Small, consistent actions make the difference. Choosing to walk instead of sit, choosing water instead of another coffee, choosing an early bedtime instead of scrolling through a phone, these micro decisions add up to macro results. We often admire resilience in others without realizing that resilience is built, not born. It's built in the daily discipline of caring for our body so that our mind can rise to the occasion. It's built in the quiet choice to prioritize sleep, the brave choice to move when we'd rather sit, the intentional choice to nourish instead of deplete. Every time we make these choices, we are not just protecting our health, we are protecting our ability to stay positive when life is hard. If we want to think clearly, hope boldly, and lead with courage, we cannot neglect the vessel that carries us through life. Our body is not separate from our mindset. It is the foundation of it. And when we care for that foundation, we create the conditions for optimism, resilience, and joy to grow even in the toughest seasons. Pain is one of life's most universal experiences. Every person in this room has felt it, carried it, and wrestled with it in one way or another. Yet when we talk about staying positive, so often the advice is about pushing pain aside, putting on a brave face, or distracting ourselves until the achy dulls. But true positivity does not come from ignoring pain. It comes from transforming it. The most enduring forms of hope and strength are born not in the absence of suffering, but in the decision to use suffering as fuel for something greater. When we face hardship, we are handed a choice. Do we allow pain to consume us, or do we allow it to refine us? Some of the most inspiring stories in history are not about people who avoided struggle, but about people who embraced it and turned it into purpose. Think of a mother who loses her child to illness and channels that grief into founding a charity that saves countless other children. Think of veterans returning from war, scarred in body and mind, yet choosing to spend their lives mentoring younger generations, guiding them through challenges that only lived experience could explain. These people did not escape pain. They lived with it, but they decided pain would not be the final chapter. It would be the prologue to a story of service. What makes this transformation so powerful is not just that it uplifts the person who is suffering, it uplifts everyone around them. When one person turns their struggle into something meaningful, it creates a ripple effect. It gives others permission to see their own pain differently. It says, this isn't the end. This can be used. This can matter. That shift in perspective is where true positivity lies, not in pretending everything is fine, but in declaring that even in the darkest places, something good can grow. Research on post-traumatic growth backs this up. Studies show that many people who endure severe hardships, illness, war, personal loss don't just recover, they emerge with a renewed sense of purpose, stronger relationships, and a deeper appreciation for life. It's not the hardship itself that creates growth, but what we decide to do with it. Pain can harden us, or it can open us, it can make us bitter, or it can make us better. The difference lies in whether we let pain define us, or whether we decide to define what pain means. But this is not easy. When life hits hard, the last thing we want to do is think about purpose. We want relief. We want the pain to stop. That's human. Yet somewhere in that space between despair and healing lies a question that can change everything. How can I use this struggle to help someone else? That question shifts the weight. Suddenly, the pain isn't just about us. It becomes fuel for connection, compassion, and contribution. Think about the organizations and movements that have shaped the world. Many of them were not born out of comfort or convenience. They were born out of grief, injustice, or struggle. Mothers Against Drunk Driving was founded by a mother who lost her daughter. Countless cancer research foundations were started by families who experienced the devastation of disease firsthand. These weren't people who woke up one day and thought, I want to start a movement. These were people who asked themselves in the depth of suffering, how can this mean something? And in answering that, they turned pain into purpose. Even on a personal scale, this transformation can be just as powerful. Imagine someone who goes through a difficult divorce. They could easily retreat into bitterness, or they could choose to use their experience to mentor others navigating heartbreak, reminding them they are not alone. Imagine someone who loses a job and feels crushed by rejection. They could spiral into self-doubt, or they could take that pain and use it as the catalyst to start their own business, creating opportunities for others. These are not grand gestures reserved for the few. These are choices available to us all. One of the most extraordinary things about pain is that it connects us. We might not share the exact same circumstances, but we all know what it feels like to hurt. And because of that, when we see someone who has taken their suffering and turned it into something meaningful, it gives us hope. It shows us that even though pain is inevitable, despair is not. That transformation doesn't erase the hurt. It honors it by refusing to let it go to waste. Think about your own life for a moment. Think of the struggles you've faced, the moments that nearly broke you, the nights you lay awake wondering if things would ever get better. Now imagine if those very experiences could become the foundation of someone else's healing. Imagine if your greatest wound could become someone else's source of strength. That is the power of turning pain into purpose. It's not about denying what happened. It's about declaring that the story isn't over yet. We admire people who do this because they remind us of what's possible. They remind us that we are not victims of life, but authors of how we respond to it. Yes, pain will visit us all. Loss will come. Setbacks will come. Injustice will come. But so will the opportunity to use it. The opportunity to take what was meant to break us and instead build something with it. Positivity in its deepest form isn't about plastering a smile over a wound. It's about taking that wound and saying, this will not be wasted. It's about finding someone else who is hurting and saying, I know how this feels. I've been there. Let me walk with you. That is where healing multiplies, where pain no longer isolates but connects, where suffering no longer ends a story but begins a legacy. So when life feels unbearable, don't ask, why me? Ask instead, who can benefit from what I've learned in this struggle? Because hidden in that question is the seed of transformation. Pain is not the enemy. It is the raw material out of which purpose is built. And when we choose to use it, we not only find positivity in the midst of hardship, we create something far more enduring, a life that matters, not despite the pain, but because of it. Life will always test us. But positivity isn't about ignoring the test. It's about choosing how we show up for it. We reframe the story, focus on what we can control, surround ourselves with the right people, practice gratitude, remember the bigger picture, care for our bodies, and finally transform our pain into purpose. Staying positive when life gets tough doesn't mean life stops being tough. It means we stop letting the storm define us. Because in the end, positivity isn't just about surviving. It's about shining even in the dark.